Hey everyone, hi there. This is the very first and pilot episode. I hope it won't be the last episode of the podcast Fly Me to the Moon, a podcast about startups, visas, travel, and amazing people. And today we're starting off with a bang. I've actually invited the person without whom this podcast wouldn't have happened, the co-founder of the startup Visarun.ai, Alena Iakina. Alena, hi, are you ready? Well, hello. Hi. We're here today to ask you some questions, to grill you a bit about how Visarun came to be, what it is, how you see it, what it is now, and what it should become in the future.
I wish someone would answer that question for me first, before I broadcast it to the masses.
Let's start with the very first question, which we got help with. We are an AI company after all. ChatGPT helped us come up with it. So what is the essence of the Visarun story? What is it about?
For me, Visarun is a solution to a very pressing, deep, annoying, and widespread problem that haunts almost every person on the planet who travels internationally, just endlessly and relentlessly. So, considering that all of us, in one way or another, have visited a number of countries, we've all gone through the circles of hell that is getting a visa. This process is completely outdated. Frankly speaking, it's terrible. If you try to do something on your own, with your own hands, you're basically very likely doomed to fail. I think each of us, in one way or another, has either failed to get a visa because of our own mistakes. Maybe we didn't Google something, missed some documents, or messed up the paperwork somewhere, or we barely managed to get the visa in the end. And considering the age of advanced technology, how various projects are implemented nowadays, how complex processes are automated, and how many cool new flows have appeared in our daily routines, it just seems obvious that visas, since we're constantly getting them, always dealing with this, always feeling the pain, always getting hit when we're inside this process, should be easier. So it was just right there on the surface to try to break it down. Is it possible to fix this mess? And we broke it down, and it seems like yes, it actually might be possible. And we decided to test it in the real world. And right now we're still in the thick of it, honestly, going through even more pain than when we used to get visas ourselves. A lot more pain. But if we succeed, and I feel that we absolutely will, because we're no longer at the very beginning of this journey, then a lot of people will pray for us and we'll be happy people. God willing. Everyone will be very grateful to us. This is pretty much our mission statement at the moment. We want to spare people this visa pain. And ourselves first and foremost, or rather ourselves first and foremost. And of course, to make some money along the way. How could we not? And secondly, to help all of humanity.
But they say that a good startup, one that becomes a unicorn, should start from your own pain. And there is pain. At the very least, you, your husband, and I all have it. Because, well, getting a US visa isn't exactly the most pleasant way to spend your evening, let's put it that way, just to submit everything.
If only it were just one evening. It's many sleepless evenings and nights, and under current circumstances, depending on your citizenship, you might not even be able to apply in your own country. So on top of that, it costs you a pretty penny.
Thank you, that was painful. Listen, let me go off topic a bit. How many countries have you been to?
Actually, it's not that many countries. Well, although it depends on your point of reference. If, say, my friends from UFA hear me say, it's not that many countries, and then I name like 35, they'll be like, are you out of your mind?
Well, yeah, everything is relative.
Yeah, considering how much the people around me have traveled. Well, about 35 countries, I think.
What's the most messed up, pardon my language, visa story? The biggest visa screw-up you've had in all these 35 countries and all the years you've been traveling?
Honestly, I've never had a truly messed up story because I've been really lucky with my friends. You know, networking has done wonders for me, I'd say, and has been really helpful in certain situations. I have friends who worked in the visa industry, and I even have a friend who's the head of a visa agency. And accordingly, I had two options. I would get visas on my own if they were simple enough, or if it was a repeat application where basically there was nothing special to do. And then there were the more complicated visas, which we handled through the visa agency. So the messed up part of the story was that we had to fly to Kuala Lumpur from Brazil with 4 layovers, if I remember correctly. I mean, Brazil to Kuala Lumpur is not a direct route at all, not even close. It wasn't an easy route, and we had to fly from Brazil to Kuala Lumpur just to get those damn stamps and that miserable visa. And before that, we still had to somehow manage to make an appointment because they required some additional apostilles since we were applying from a third country and so on. So all of this had to be arranged through the country where I was born. So there was all this hassle with the paperwork and so on. Well, it was just really tough. The main thing was that it was this drawn out, hellish micromanagement, just endless. You're always missing something, always redoing things, always forgetting to buy something, something falls apart, something else comes up, circumstances change. Especially now, after COVID, when you open a website, refresh the page, and there are already new visa requirements posted.
Ah,
And you're in the process, you've already bought the ticket, but it's like you're screwed, you're not going to get anything now. Under those circumstances, yeah. So it was challenging, let's put it that way, not a total disaster.
by the way, speaking of all the requirements and peculiarities of different countries, we have a wiki and a knowledge base that really helps people figure out all these tons of requirements they have if you want to come to their country. Like, sure, come over, but here's a list of everything you need to provide. Oh, and by the way, if you want to become our client, all the contact information is in the description. We'll find the perfect offer for you. Speaking of interesting visas, I have a story. So, the first or second time I was getting a Schengen visa, it was for Germany. I needed to go there for literally just 5 days. I was a completely inexperienced traveler at that point. A friend of mine who lives there just invited me over. I applied for the visa on time and all that, but they took a really long time to process it. Meanwhile, they called me at work. At work, it was a huge company where nobody even knew who I was. So basically, everything was hanging by a thread. And at some point, they finally wrote to me saying, "Come pick up your visa." They wrote to me on Friday evening, and my flight was on Monday at 2 o'clock. They don't work on Saturday or Sunday, so I couldn't pick up the visa. And I didn't even know if they'd approved it or not. So I thought, well, if anything goes wrong, that's it, it's all over. I'll just go back home. I go to Shabalovskaya, pick up my passport, and I'm like, I open it. Visa. Multiple entry for 5 days. I'm like, thank you, sweeties.
Really, just 5?
For the whole trip. And they were like, well, you're welcome, go ahead and travel. And I said, thank you. Well, it was a very interesting experience. There's a book, I think it's called Startup Guide. There was a phrase in there that said, a good startup can be described by the fact that its essence can be explained to your grandma in simple words easily and without having to struggle to find those words. How would you explain what you do, what you're building to your grandma?
Damn. It's just really funny that I've had several iterations throughout my entire career trying to explain to my grandma what I do. When all those attempts ended in complete failure, she still has absolutely no idea. I suspect I have some kind of problem with explaining complicated things in simple terms. So it all started with SEO optimization when I tried to explain what search engine results are, and honestly, that's where everything just collapsed for me right away. How would I explain it to my grandma? Grandma, if you end up watching this, I'll try for the 10th time to explain what I do. I guess I need to start from the very beginning, from far away. It's a global world, and there's the ESP market, accordingly. You can't just travel around planet Earth just like that, so to speak, without any documents. Every country has certain requirements, regulations, and so on in order to filter the flow of people coming into their countries, to maintain a certain level of migration security, and so on and so forth. They have their own reasons for this, and that's why there are certain visa requirements, right? There are conditions for entering a country that you have to meet, and an approval, so to speak, that you meet these conditions. This is called a visa. You're explaining to your grandma what a visa is, because she probably doesn't remember or has never traveled at all. To be honest, I have no idea how it was for her many years ago. And accordingly, in order to get this very approval, I've already switched from the word approval to a more fitting term, as it better reflects the true nature of what is being sought. Grandma, you need approval, and then, I don't know.
Approval.
Approval means getting accepted. So approval means that you meet all these criteria, and you get approval in the form of a visa. To get this visa, you have 2 options. Either you fill out the forms, gather the documents, make an appointment at the embassy, print out all this stuff, give your fingerprints, and so on. The whole process you need to go through on your own. Or you have a second option, to go to a visa agency, where you'll basically go through the same circles of hell, but instead of having to Google the application form yourself, they'll just hand it to you, so you'll still have to fill it out yourself. They'll give you a list of documents, but you'll still end up bringing the wrong ones, then have to redo them, bring the wrong ones again, and redo them again. So you go through these circles of hell in one of two ways, either on your own or through a visa agency. And so you gather this whole set of criteria and finally get that coveted visa. All the while having spent a huge chunk of your life on this. Meanwhile, we're building a product online, on a website. So how does that work? I don't even know how else to explain it. You can do everything I just mentioned, from filling out the application to booking an appointment at the embassy, all on your computer. Like we're talking to each other on Skype right now. You could very easily and conveniently open another tab in your web browser, for example, and basically get that essential visa right there, instantly and without any hassle. And that's precisely what we are diligently building and meticulously developing. Thanks to this incredibly innovative and highly efficient website, we can now legally and seamlessly travel between various countries around the world, making international journeys much more accessible and straightforward for everyone involved.
That's a solid answer. I used to explain it much more simply when the time came. I just said that it's really hard to get visas right now, and we're doing everything we can to make the process easier. But as for the question of what visas actually are, I never explained that because I explained it to my mom, friends, and so on, but not to my grandma. But I think my grandma would probably understand what a visa is, because in the USSR, there were exit visas.
Agreed? Yeah. I think we can skip the part where I explained to my grandma what a visa is. Fair enough. Most likely she actually knows about it.
Well, your grandma isn't really your ideal user. Actually, the question I came to you with when we were discussing the very beginning of all this, who are we targeting? Who is the ideal user?
If we're talking globally about where we're heading, our dream all along, well, our current chosen direction, or rather our dream, is to eventually move toward a B2C model and make it so that any traveler whose passport requires a visa to enter a particular country is our potential client, regardless of their citizenship, location, and so on. So, in other words, that's truly the ideal client we want to have and consider as our own. At the moment, considering that the platform is still being developed, scenarios are being tested, everything is being refined and automated and so on, everything is being polished. In other words, the B2C story is difficult to roll out at this stage. And for now, we're actively communicating with various companies. And, well, here it's more about probably the significant pain points and the overall flow, the comprehensive flow of travelers from these companies. And accordingly, it seems like our truly ideal client is some large multinational company that actively interacts with other global markets, other diverse countries, actively participates in numerous conferences, important negotiations, and so on and so forth, where there's a large, consistent flow of business travelers. So, well, naturally, everyone truly and genuinely loves, say, an incredibly large and significant enterprise client, primarily because by their very nature and default, they typically possess a very substantial number of dedicated employees, and quite often it's some kind of complex and extensive international setup, of course, complete with a large, well-established global mobility department that, in fact, meticulously goes through all these arduous circles of hell where their intricate processes are essentially built out of numerous, often cumbersome manual processes and procedures. That's exactly what I was describing. And in fact, if you have a large flow of people traveling within the company, you're constantly juggling all sorts of hellish conditions, ever-changing data, ongoing communication between departments, between the travelers themselves, and so on and so forth. So when talking to people from a specific sector, almost everyone's processes are in complete chaos. They might be able to automate one part or another, but one way or another, somewhere there's always some kind of mess. And in the end, this very often leads to missed deadlines, ruined trips, and financial risks. Not to mention that the people working in global mobility have so many interesting and exciting tasks they could be focusing on instead of sitting around micromanaging employees who brought in the wrong document, like, I don't know, confusing a work certificate with a doctor's note, or even a prescription from a doctor. I mean, it's just such nonsense that nobody really wants to waste their time on, and honestly, it's actually pretty easy to solve. If you look at all the problems people face on the way to getting a visa, basically, if you break them down individually, each one is actually very easy to automate. And bringing all of that together would solve a lot of problems. So basically, the biggest problem is actually the chaos in the processes, because there are so many people, so many documents, so many forms, so much data, and you need to organize all of it. And as a rule, you have to do it yourself if you're a global mobility manager, a manager. And it seems like this poor person in this particular part of their job is definitely not very happy. I feel it. I know it. Basically, from talking to employees in many companies who hold these positions. This is exactly the person who really needs help first and foremost, and it's with them that we should prepare for the global dream so that eventually everyone, absolutely everyone, can receive documents through the platform.
Another very important point is that, in addition to automating things and making it easier for this segment of clients, meaning the people who handle business trips and so on, it's also extremely important for those who are actually going on business trips. The service is very transparent, so you won't make a mistake, like, for example, arriving in in the UAE, to work, maybe to open an office or engage in professional activities, and end up entering on a tourist visa. No, you'll know that you need to get an Emirates ID and go through certain steps. Everything will be explained in the simplest terms possible, down to instructions like turn right. So I think that's also really important. That's just a real life example. A friend of mine told me about this recently, and we face-palmed for probably 20 minutes, like, oh my God, how is that even possible? And then it hit me that, people often don't read emails, but here you have a service that basically gives you almost your entire travel plan. Everything is laid out step by step, with all the actions you need to actually make the trip happen. Speaking of the overall picture, so, for example, right now, our ideal client would be someone like Etihad. But in the future, we'd like to have individual travelers who are like, oh, today I want to go to Japan, and tomorrow I want to fly to the US, but I have a weak passport. At least that's how I see it. I'm working on this with the summarizer from Gemini. Sorry.
Listen, you're doing 7 times better. I've just encountered GPT-5. Everyone promised me that it would instantly be like 3 times smarter.
I'm disappointed too.
In the end, it's actually slower for me than the 4th one. I just can't figure it out.
I actually rolled back to 4.1 because 5 is just, I'm like, dude, you've completely forgotten everything we discussed. Our past means nothing to you.
Absolutely nothing. It's like the whole conversation, even within a single dialogue. I mean, don't even get me started on memory, on memorizing. Even within one conversation, it's as if he's never talked to me at all. That's why you're self-raising.
Thank you. All right. I've never launched startups. I have a feeling that a lot of people want to, but have never actually launched one. And by a lot, I mean the listeners or viewers. I have a question. They say it's like an emotional roller coaster, even worse than those karmic relationships everyone talks about on Instagram. Is that true? How did you deal with the difficulties? Because I'm sure there were just tons of difficulties.
Well, it really is a complicated relationship. One of the most complicated relationships I've ever had in my life. How do I deal with... it's hard to say, and I'm not even sure I am dealing with it. Maybe I'm not dealing with it. Maybe I'll just throw this damn laptop on the floor and walk out because I can't take it anymore.
Because ChatGPT-5 forgot your entire conversation history in terms of psychology, and that's it.
Seriously, I haven't spoken to it for a whole day since it came out. Wait, so... what was the question?
What was the absolute lowest point when you hit rock bottom and then it felt like someone knocked from below during the process of launching the startup itself? Because, it's not an easy process in and of itself. I used to think, I'll just pitch my idea, they'll just give me money, and I'll be, distributing it. But in reality, it's actually hard. I don't even know what you have to do, so tell us.
Oh my God. Well, as they say, a startup is a startup for a reason. This process is endlessly cyclical. You're constantly spinning around, stuck in a loop where you never really understand anything. It's honestly really tough. On the one hand, it's cool because you're always in a phase of expansion, constantly learning something new, endlessly growing outward, at least for now, because you're always plugging all the holes yourself, just like in any startup. On the other hand, you have absolutely no stability anywhere or in anything. So an idea comes up, and just like any task we set for ourselves, whether it's difficult or simple, it always consists of certain steps. We break down a task into steps and then break each step down into sub-steps in order to understand how to implement each one. So initially, the goal was to potentially get some money. To get money, first you need to cobble together some kind of MVP, even if it's just a rough prototype made out of whatever you have on hand. And then accordingly, you go through that whole stage. To put together an MVP, you need to describe the project, actually figure out how it's supposed to work, analyze all the stages from point A to the final point, see if it can even work the way we've envisioned, and so on. I won't go into detail about every single step of the decomposition, And within each step, you break everything down into sub-steps and accordingly start going through each step as if you were a preschooler. We all built our careers, followed a certain path, like, for example, my own background is basically in marketing. Now, in the end, you have to understand product, investments, sales, finance, and so on and so forth. So basically, when all this started, looking at anything other than the marketing side seemed absolutely impossible. Well, I had to sit down and map everything out. Thank God, by the way, GPT already existed. That made it easier. It was much easier. Basically, at a high level, it would lay things out for you. And then, as long as you're not an idiot, after some doubt, you take its points, refine them, and eventually put together a reasonable strategy to make it all happen. So you're constantly searching for information, constantly learning, always lacking resources, endlessly so, and you constantly have to deal with it. One day, you're diligently selling a particular product. The very next day, you're meticulously learning how to precisely draw intricate graphs. Then you're energetically running around shooting engaging videos for your Instagram account. And then, quite unexpectedly, you end up thoroughly cleaning the office bathroom because you simply didn't have sufficient time for anything else at all.
B. Business.
To close, so to speak, to hire, and so on. Even decomposition, yes, decomposition is displayed on the screens. And then you break it down step by step. With each step, you understand some things better, others less so.
So, out of all these steps, what was the hardest one for you? Well, for example, was there something you found it hard to come to terms with yourself about, like, no, I'm not going to do this? But then you end up doing it anyway, because who else is going to do it for you?
Honestly, everything is interesting. I already have quite a lot of work experience, and marketing has worn me out over all these years. Wherever I go, everything is insanely interesting. You know, you start to find out, back when I was at previous companies, what people were actually doing. Some were coding, for example, or selling something, or doing account management. And honestly, you just didn't care at all. Like, what are they even doing? Nothing really, just some questionable, boring crap. But now you realize, damn, it's insanely interesting. It's all really complicated. It actually requires a huge pool of knowledge, experience, some basic mental abilities, and so on. But for me, sales are probably the hardest part. Just because selling, I don't know, it's a whole different personality type. Because I never knew how to barge in and take charge, and I always felt awkward about it. I always felt like something wasn't enough, or the price was too high, and so on. You know, for example, when I went to interviews at different companies, I always felt, that imposter syndrome, right? By the way, that's exactly what it's called. Imposter complex, or imposter syndrome, I think. And honestly, I still have it even now. Like, yeah, the product is awesome. We have everything's super great, but still, well, maybe it could have been done better. Well, maybe we could have tweaked something here or there. Maybe something wasn't quite finished or something else. Basically, you start constantly feeling some kind of insecurity, and figuratively speaking, you're not exactly kicking doors off their hinges.
Yeah, it's hard to kick down a door when you don't have the critical mass to actually break it down. And imposter syndrome really holds you back. It basically makes you feel small. Like you feel small in a room with with important men and women. You know what I wanted to ask? You described your feelings very clearly. I could actually picture them, and honestly, for a second I zoned out and got lost in them. What would you advise people to do so that those who feel this way right now can believe in themselves and start kicking down doors?
Of course, I'm not really the best person to give advice on this, because I only started kicking down some doors when I simply had no other options, but that's a bit of a different motivation than overcoming the syndrome. No, it's not like you have, say, a team behind you drilling a hole in your back and you're forced to knock on that door, walk in and pitch something anyway. Listen, I don't know. I feel like, well, you're never going to be ready. You're just never going to be ready. You're never going to be competent enough to launch a startup perfectly right from the start, with everything going great. You need to understand everything from beginning to end. That means you have to be a programmer, a CIO, an account manager, a marketer, and basically everyone else all at once. Basically, you're expected to be a jack of all trades, a master of everything, even a tank driver. All right, maybe we can do without the tank driving. Oh, come on. You're never going to be that kind of person. I don't know. Like Edward Scissorhands. You just won't. Well, unless you're, some kind of very unhappy genius who somehow has managed to gather all the talents in the world within yourself, and now you have to live with that. So you're never going to be fully prepared. You'll always be somewhat lacking in competence somewhere, and in some areas you'll be completely incompetent. It all depends on the kind of business you're building. You'll always have to learn something new, and you'll always be doing something for the first time somewhere. In fact, most of the time, you'll be doing everything for the first time. That's what I'm realizing now. I mean, I'm working here, and honestly, this is my first experience with a startup. God willing, it'll be the first and last, straight to unicorns, choo-choo. But let's be objective, right? That's not a given. Hopefully, it won't be my last experience. Of course, it'll be easier the second time around. But one way or another, you'll end up dealing with your own set of issues again. So in the end, you'll draw a bunch of conclusions from your first try, and then you'll start building your knowledge base all over again, just like you did before. You're inexperienced again, but now it's like you have negative experience, which of course is actually positive. Negative experience is still experience, and you can always turn it to your advantage. So if you have an idea you're passionate about, and you more or less understand that it's doable, and damn it, how it should be done, because everything starts with an idea. So until you have that inspiration, that idea you're passionate about, that feeling of, this is it, now's the moment, I have to give it my all, because great ideas get snapped up really quickly. They're like hotcakes. If you don't do it, someone else will tomorrow. But you know how to do it. You have it. You're fired up. That's it. In 5 years, you'll still be tearing your hair out and crying to GPT, asking, why is all this happening to me? How much longer?
You just take it and do it. Yeah, I agree.
Any complex process can be broken down into sub-processes, forming a chain.
Yeah, it's not so scary when you have some kind of task like, I don't know, spending an hour pestering ChatGPT about some part of the product, figuring out how to solve it better, and then an idea will come to you. And if you're really passionate about it, that hour will turn into 5 hours, and something will definitely come out of it. Well, that's how it seems to me.
Absolutely. And then once you get the hang of it, you'll start figuring out everything you need even faster.
Yeah. The more information you accumulate, the more data you have to make decisions. Because basically, we really are neural networks. And the more information we have on a subject, the easier it is for us to find a path from neuron A to neuron B, which passes through neuron C, and everything happens faster and faster each time. In short, that's it. It's all training. We're models, and our life is... Okay, I'm getting off track. All right, that's enough. I wanted to ask you about your personal vibe, your unique approach when you find yourself utterly exhausted and truly tired of everything, feeling completely overwhelmed and on the verge of giving up entirely. In those challenging moments, what specific strategies or who among your trusted circle genuinely helps you to effectively regain your composure and get back on the right track, moving forward with renewed purpose and energy?
Oh, well, that's about thinking in terms of dopamine boosts, all that stuff. Well, actually, considering how our dopamine system works, I read a lot about this topic, and I want, for things not to move in a sinusoidal pattern, but to be more or less steady and consistent. Because when your dopamine, so to speak, rises to some crazy heights, you inevitably experience a corresponding drop afterwards. So when you practice a bit of dopamine scheduling, you end up smoothing things out a little. You don't have any major crashes or big spikes, and this also affects your work. I try, of course, to set big picture goals. Those are definitely what we're moving toward, the light bulb and the carrot for the little donkey named Alena. That's all great, but it's also important not to forget to set mid-level goals so you can celebrate achievements more often. Because if we, set a goal like earning $3 million in the UAE market, for example, in the end, over the course of a year, you'll end up getting really upset all the time because even though you're moving toward the goal, it either seems to be getting closer or it's getting closer too slowly or not as fast as I'd like. That's when all of that starts happening. And if perfectionism kicks in on top of that, then that's it. You're screwed. Hello, disaster. I try to approach it like, if you figured out the process, good for you. If you set up all the necessary platform integrations well to achieve certain marketing KPIs, that's great. And considering how we discussed things in the previous stage, you really don't know a damn thing. But now, it turns out you've learned, gotten smarter, and set it all up with your own hands. Isn't that impressive? Isn't that something to be proud of? Jokes aside, honestly, you should be happy about that too. You learned something. That's awesome. I don't know, maybe if you set some, say, weekly goals, like, you launched a new country, a new graph, and so on, or added new citizenship. It's all really great because honestly, when you dive into all the processes and are constantly actively involved, you realize how much hard work goes into it. You understand that adding just one country, it might seem odd, right? 170-something countries under a single citizenship. Actually, it sounds kind of crazy. Like, Give me 5 seconds. I'll just sit down and code it. Seriously, it'll take 3 seconds. But no, it's a huge effort. It's a lot of business expertise that goes into the core of the graph. It's the work of analysts, the work of architects, engineers, and so on. And you realize, honestly, damn, it's an achievement. All right, let's celebrate. We've launched a new country. That's a big deal. And when you really realize just how long the chain of actions is to reach the goal, how much needs to be done, well, when you understand in the end just how difficult it is, you see how important it is to celebrate the intermediate successes.
Enjoy the many little things in life, but always keep that significant overarching goal firmly in sight and remember it clearly. And try to look at situations that truly frustrate you from a completely different and fresh angle so you can discover something genuinely positive and beneficial in them too.
That's absolutely right. Sounds insanely easy.
Yeah. Like, guys, go ahead, build your own startups. It's unbelievably easy. That was a joke, just so you know.
Yeah. And think positive. Just don't be a negative person.
Yeah. Don't be sad. You're depressed? Just don't be sad.
Look at the sunshine. It's a beautiful day. Green grass. All that stuff. Go ahead, throw a tomato at me. I know how it sounds.
Listen, honestly, that's the foundation, and everything else is individual for everyone. I mean, for example, you have your own set of actions and processes that bring you joy, that keep you moving toward your goal. For instance, it could be learning something entirely new, perhaps figuring something complex out, or even launching some small initial stage within that broader funnel. For me, for example, I don't know, writing something incredibly complex myself and then having it successfully compile and work. That's a significant achievement. Or, my God, signing up some ambassador, like the first one or even the 10th one, the emotions are still going to be amazing. Also for me, what else is there? What motivates me? A business trip, whether it's 2 weeks in Mexico or just 2 days somewhere not far away, excites me just the same. So, you see, what I'm saying is that the formula works, it's just hard to find the right combination.
That's why, in this situation, what helps me is understanding the complexity of processes in which, for example, I'm not actively involved. So if we're talking globally, from the perspective of a startup, when you're essentially running it, when you start to really appreciate the intense work the team members are doing, even just understanding things at a high level and realizing how complex and time-consuming it all is, and the real rocket science involved, you start to feel happy for them, just like you would for yourself, or for your own children, honestly.
We're all family.
Well, that's just from the startup perspective. If we're talking about life in general, actually, I'm not a very positive person, to be honest. This is only about the startup. It's just about the startup. There are all these deep psychological patterns and all that, but I'm not going to get into that now.
Well, let's wrap it up then. Thank you so much. The very first episode is already with a co-founder, so I think that's a success. It's going to be hard to keep the bar this high. Thank you. If you have any final words, go ahead. If not, until next time. Guys, don't forget to like everywhere. And if you want to become our client, the contact information will be in the description. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dasha, for the wonderful conversation and for the final word. Of course, I'm not much of a speaker. Don't listen to me, listen to your heart.
Pow. Mic drop. That's it.